Hello, I'm Hannah, and this is Hannah's Books. Welcome to the first of what I imagine might be several belated Tag Tuesdays in Victober. In honor of this month dedicated to all things Victorian, I want to answer the prompts of the great tag created by the wonderful A.J. Dunn, the It's All Relative tag, with answers all related to Victober in some way. For those of you waiting for the final installment of the Q&A answers, I promise it's coming eventually, but I can't resist talking about Victorian books a bit first. So here goes. Prompt number 1, Mamma Mia. Recommend a book with a mother character that is pivotal to the story. I've just started Anthony Trollope's The Way We Live Now, one of the two really huge books on my Victober TBR, and I've completely fallen in love with Lady Carberry. She's introduced in the very first few pages. Before the beginning of the novel, she's been widowed and left with insufficient funds to take care of her son and daughter in the style they all expect. So she finds a way to make money herself. She decides to write Pot Boilers. And she's not only a writer, but an effective marketer of her literary outputs, not always marketed in the most honest or ethical way. I think Matilda Carberry is a great answer for this prompt, really for two reasons. First, her role as a working woman is only part of the importance of her character. Her role as mother to both her playboy son Felix and her steadfast and sensible daughter Hedda is the more relevant plotline, I would argue. And although there is a lot of debate about who might have inspired Lady Carberry, and I've seen several different suggestions, one of the arguments is that Anthony Trollope modeled the character after his own prolific novel-writing mother, Frances Trollope. Let's go on to prompt number 2, Papa Don't Preach, a book about a father character you like or despise. Here, I think I'll mention the father in The Mayor of Casterbridge by Thomas Hardy. In the first chapter, we see Michael Henchard feeling desperate, getting drunk, and mistreating his family. I don't know if one can really call something that happens in the beginning of a book a spoiler, but what happens is dramatic and meaningful, something we're supposed to be aware of all through the rest of the book. The rest of the book is about Henchard's efforts towards both reconciliation and redemption, especially about his effort to redeem himself as a father. While this is not my favorite Hardy book, it's a powerful one that has really stuck with me. Prompt 3, Brothers and Sisters, a book with an interesting sibling relationship. How about the relationship between Tom and Maggie Tolliver in George Eliot's The Mill and the Floss? I think a lot of fiction from before, during, and after the Victorian period paints siblings as either the closest of pals or as bickering playmates of some sort. But the relationship between Tom and Maggie is quite a bit more nuanced. For a while, their relationship is disintegrated, but near the end, a sad kind of reconciliation happens. I suspect you'll be hearing more about George Eliot's characters as I go through these questions. She has a real knack for painting subtle relationships between characters. Prompt 4, It's Been 84 Years, a Family Saga. That is a book you like that is multi-generational, or a book that chronicles a character's whole life. I find it really fascinating that I can't think of any big family sagas in Victorian literature. Perhaps I'm defining family saga too specifically, but the absence of what I at least think of as family sagas at exactly this time when people were reading and writing all these huge narratives is kind of interesting. Can any of you think of any? If not, why do you think family sagas weren't a thing during the Victorian period? One that I suppose covers more than one generation is Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights because of the replication of its plot. But the novel just isn't a classic family saga in my mind. So here I think I'll name instead a book published in the post-Victorian period, a story which begins during the Victorian period, but then carries forward. That book, or collection of books, is the Forsyte Saga by John Galsworthy. The first book is the story of Soames Forsyte, a, quote, man of property, who is basically a man who is trying to negotiate the position of someone who has just recently come into money, who's gone from being relatively poor to someone with power and possessions, but not the kind of respect that the landed gentry have. His beautiful wife, Irene, is deeply hurt by the ways her husband tries to prove that even she is his property. And the way she responds to that fracture in their relationship is one of the things that shapes the family saga that comes after that incident. I think The Man of Property, the first book in the Forsyte Saga, was published in 1906, just a handful of years after Queen Victoria died. Okay, prop number 5, You Complete Me, a book with an interesting marriage as a central element in the story. An enormous number of books, Victorian and otherwise, are about the lead up to marriage, matchmaking, dating, falling in love, even scheming for a titled husband or a landed bride. But often the marriages are the end goal, not the starting point. Yes, many novels have older characters who are married, but wildly, a whole lot of parents in these novels are single themselves, often because of widowhood. One novel that takes marriage as pretty much the starting point of the story is George Eliot's Middlemarch, and there are several interesting relationships explored in the book. The one I want to mention here is the marriage between Dorothea and Casaubon. Dorothea wants to do some good in the world, some grandiose and obviously virtuous thing that might even require her to sacrifice. One way she eventually tries to do something important is by marrying a much older scholarly man she thinks is a genius. Her plan is that she will help him with his masterwork, even learn Latin and Greek to help him do research. It doesn't take long after they're married for Dorothea to realize that her husband is not the genius she expected, and neither is he at all kind or loving to her. But Dorothea is committed to him, and we watch her struggle against not only loneliness but resentment as she tries so hard to be kind and patient to him. In other words, the goodness she wanted to do in the world is something she has to master in herself and in her immediate home life. And it's her not-so-perfect marriage which makes her grow. Over the course of the novel, Dorothea learns to exert a kind of self-control that actually allows her to live a fully realized life, giving her not only joy and love, but also the ability to improve the lives of those around her. Prompt 6. Picture It, Cicely, a book with an interesting older character, i.e. a grandparent or great-grandparent, etc. Mr. Smallweed from the novel Bleak House by Charles Dickens is not the main protagonist of the book, but Smallweed's relationship to his granddaughter is certainly part of what makes him such a memorable character. He's a slimy old man who exploits people or tries to trick people in order to pad his own pockets. His granddaughter Judy helps take care of him and assists him however he needs. Due to his paralysis, I guess, throughout the book, he is carried all over town while sitting in his armchair. And very frequently, he asks his granddaughter to, quote, shake him up a little. The actor who plays Smallwood in the BBC adaptation is, well, perfectly ghastly and perfectly cast. He frequently bellows to his granddaughter, "Shake me up, Judy." I guess the shaking is to keep his bones from settling in uncomfortable ways. It's definitely memorable. All right, prompt number 7, Friends with Benefits, a book with found family, or a friends as family element. Despite the fact that Charlotte Bronte's protagonist in Jane Eyre is not raised with family members who love her, she seeks out family wherever she goes. Yes, there is certainly a way in which Jane is an introvert and a loner, but the connections she makes are deep and full. Her first real friend is Helen Burns, her loyal and pious classmate at the Lowell School. One could argue that several different characters at Thornfield become family members for her. And then there are the Rivers, Mary and Diana, and also St. John. Although their relationship is complicated, let's say with all its meanings that things get real, the Rivers invite Jane to be part of their family. Next, prompt 8. I think we're alone now. A book with a character who was lost, left behind, or abandoned. It can also be a story with an orphaned or adopted character. Now, this is a common trope in Victorian literature, and I think I could have chosen almost any of the books I've already mentioned. But this time I'm going to name one of the books I'm reading for Victober, Daniel Deronda by George Eliot. You can choose just about any character here in this book, actually. Deronda himself is being raised by a man who calls himself his uncle, and later in the book we find out the events that led to Daniel being raised by Sir Hugo. When he finds out the truth about his parents, Deronda finds a fairly large way to create a real sense of home and belonging. Gwendolyn Harleth's abandonment is a bit different. And actually, there's several ways to define it. One could probably be called a spoiler, and I'll skip that one. A larger one is that she attempts to abandon her old self as she struggles to create a more honest and whole Gwendolyn. Mira has been taken away from her mother, mistreated by her father, and abandons him to come to England in order to search for her family. She also tries to abandon herself in a very different kind of way than Gwendolyn does. Another major character has abandoned the mother of his children, etc. But as I've already hinted, some of these characters who've been orphaned or left behind, or who at the very least felt that something crucial was missing in their lives, do in the end find a kind of home, or self, or connection. And I think that's absolutely typical in books, especially Victorian books perhaps, about people who are lost. On to the last prompt, number 9, Fur Baby. A book where a pet or animal is part of the family, or plays an important role in the book. My first thought for this prompt was the birds in Dickens' Bleak House, but I want to talk about something a bit different. So far, I've been mentioning fairly canonical works of Victorian literature, now read mostly by adults. But here I want to list one of my favorite books from childhood, Black Beauty by Anna Sewell. I guess fundamentally the book is about kindness to both humans and other animals. The story is narrated in the first person and is essentially the fictional autobiography of a horse named Black Beauty. Actually, while this book isn't a family saga, it might answer the other option in that question about a book covering the entire lifespan of a character. The novel starts with Black Beauty's carefree days as a foal on an English farm with his mother, and then talks about the difficulties he confronts throughout his working life, pulling cabs in London, etc. And then eventually we see his happy retirement in the country. Each chapter tells a particular incident with a lesson or a moral, often related to empathy or compassion. If you know a child going through sort of a horsey period, and for me that horsey period was only about horses and books, give them a copy of Black Beauty. Well, that is it for this tag and for this video. Thank you so much, AJ, for creating this terrific tag, which works so nicely with Victorian choices. And thanks to all of you for joining me here today on Hannah's Books. See you soon.